Before this story begins, subscribe right now, because tonight's story starts with a betrayal so cruel it changes a young woman's destiny forever. On her 18th birthday, her stepmother traded her away to the kingdom's feared crippled Alpha King to save her own daughter from that fate. Everyone believed she was being sent to a life of misery. But what if the man they called Broken was hiding a secret powerful enough to shake an entire kingdom? If you love emotional werewolf romances, Alpha Kings, family betrayal, hidden conspiracies, powerful queens, and shocking twists that completely change everything, hit subscribe now. Because the girl who was sacrificed as a pawn is about to become the most important woman in the kingdom. And by the time the truth is revealed, no one will see her the same way again. The heavy iron gates of the Blackwood fortress didn't just close. They slammed shut with a deafening metallic shriek that echoed off the jagged obsidian cliffs, severing the last thread tying 18-year-old Clara Sullivan to the world she had known. The air here didn't taste of the sweet pine and familiar sun-warmed earth of her childhood pack. It tasted of ash, bitter frost, and the unmistakable scent of stagnant blood. Rain poured from a bruised midnight sky, freezing the moment it touched her bare arms. She shivered violently, her threadbare white cotton dress, the only thing her stepmother had allowed her to wear, clinging like a second icy skin to her frame. She was alone. Stranded in the untamed, treacherous territory of the northern wastes. Traded away like an animal, a worthless piece of meat thrown to a monster just so her stepsister Evelyn could continue living her charmed, golden life. Hello my beautiful friends, and a truly warm welcome to each and every one of you watching tonight. Whether you are tuning in from the quiet, misty hills of Scotland, the bustling, neon-lit streets of Tokyo, the warm heart of Texas, or anywhere else in our vast, incredible world, I am so deeply grateful to have you here with us. How are you all doing today? I hope life is treating you with kindness, but if it isn't, I hope this story offers you a sanctuary, a place to lose yourself for a while. If you haven't already joined our family, please take a brief moment right now to hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and drop a comment below letting me know exactly where you're listening from. Your incredible support keeps these emotional journeys alive, and trust me, you will not want to miss a single second of the dark, heart-wrenching, and breathtakingly beautiful tale we are diving into today. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, her fingers digging into the rough palms of her hands until her nails drew blood. The phantom scent of her stepmother Beatrice's expensive floral perfume still lingered in her nose, a sickening contrast to the bleak, terrifying reality she now faced. "You will go and you will not say a single word," Beatrice had hissed only hours earlier, her manicured claws digging into Clara's shoulder as she dragged her toward the unmarked transport carriage. The Alpha King demanded a bride from the Sullivan bloodline to seal the border treaty. "Do you honestly think I would let him touch my precious Evelyn? A crippled, bitter freak who rules over a kingdom of ghosts and bones? No. You will take her place. You will be his sacrifice. And if you dare reveal who you truly are, I will ensure what's left of your father's memory is utterly erased from this earth." The carriage had moved under the cover of total darkness, bypassing the main roads, arriving at this desolate, Gothic nightmare before dawn. Clara's chest heaved as she opened her eyes, staring up at the monolithic stone structure of the fortress. It loomed over her like an executioner's axe. This was the lair of Alpha King Ethan Hunt. The rumors about him were whispered in terrified, hushed tones across every shifting pack territory. Once he had been the apex predator of the entire continent, a warrior of unmatched, terrifying power, possessing a feral strength that kept the rogue factions and rebellious lords paralyzed with fear. But 2 years ago, a mysterious, devastating ambush in the treacherous Shattered Peaks had left his elite guard slaughtered and the king himself broken. The savage attack had severed his spine, leaving him crippled, unable to walk without the aid of heavy, braced crutches, and entirely incapable of shifting into his fearsome midnight-furred wolf. The proud warrior had been reduced to a shadow, a bitter, reclusive ruler who locked himself away within the freezing walls of Blackwood, watching his political power bleed out as ambitious rivals circled his weakening borders like starving vultures. They said pain had driven him mad. They said he slaughtered servants who looked at his ruined legs with pity. And now, Clara had been delivered directly into his clutches, an imposter bride holding a secret that could get her executed before the sun fully rose. The massive iron-reinforced oak doors of the inner keep groaned open, breaking the oppressive silence. A towering, grim-faced guard dressed in dark leather armor and bearing a jagged scar across his throat stepped out into the rain. He didn't offer an umbrella. He didn't offer a greeting. His cold amber wolf eyes swept over Clara's shivering, drenched form, lingering on her lack of fine garments, traveling up to her pale, terrified face where her wide, stormy blue eyes stared back at him. "Step inside, girl," the guard barked, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "The king does not like to be kept waiting. Especially not by a bride who arrives looking like a drowned stray." Clara swallowed the lump of pure terror rising in her throat, her legs trembling so violently she wasn't sure they would support her weight. She took a step forward, the freezing mud squelching beneath her bare feet. Every primitive instinct in her omega biology was screaming at her to turn and run, to sprint blindly into the dark, wolf-infested woods surrounding the fortress, even if it meant freezing to death. But she thought of her late father's journals, locked away in Beatrice's safe. She thought of the wicked smile on Evelyn's face as she watched Clara being dragged away. He had to survive. He had to find a way through this living nightmare. As she crossed the threshold into the cavernous, shadow-drenched great hall, the heavy doors slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. The air inside was suffocating, thick with the scent of old wood, melted wax, and a crushing dominant alpha aura that made the tiny wolf inside Clara cower in absolute submission. The hall was entirely lit by flickering torches, casting long, monstrous shadows against the stone walls. At the far end of the room, positioned before a massive, roaring fireplace that offered no real warmth to the bleak atmosphere, sat a colossal high-backed throne made of twisted black iron. And there he was. Alpha King Ethan Hunt. He wasn't sitting proudly. He was leaned back, his massive broad-shouldered frame draped in a heavy fur-lined black cloak that hid the lower half of his body. Resting against the side of the iron throne were two polished, terrifyingly heavy steel forearm crutches, their tips reinforced with dark rubber. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Even sitting down, even broken, his physical presence was utterly overwhelming. His jawline was sharp, covered in a dark, rugged stubble, and a faint silver scar ran vertically over his left eyebrow, slashing down past his cheekbone. But it was his eyes that froze the blood in Clara's veins. They weren't the warm gold of a ruling alpha. They were a piercing, luminescent, lethal silver, burning with an intense, volatile mixture of deep-seated fury, agonizing pain, and profound, suffocating isolation. He didn't move. He didn't smile. He merely stared down at her from his iron perch, his silver gaze drilling into her soul, stripping away every defense she had. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating, ticking away like a bomb about to detonate. "You are not Evelyn Sullivan," Ethan finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the stone floor and straight into Clara's chest. He didn't lift his heavy cloak, but the sheer, lethal pressure of his alpha command slammed into the room, making the torches flicker wildly. "I know the scent of the woman promised to me by the Sullivan pack. You are an imposter. Tell me why I shouldn't tear your throat out right now and send your severed head back to your pack alpha in a box." Clara fell to her knees on the cold stone, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was looking into the eyes of a monster who had nothing left to lose. If she spoke the truth, Beatrice would destroy her father's legacy. If she lied, the king would kill her where she knelt. How could a girl who had lost everything survive a king who had been stripped of his pride? What dark secrets were hiding behind those burning silver eyes? And what would happen when Ethan discovered exactly why she had been sent to his bed? The raw, suffocating weight of Ethan's alpha aura pressed down on Clara's shoulders, a physical force that demanded absolute, unconditional surrender. Her knees throbbed against the unforgiving stone floor, the freezing water dripping from her hair pooling around her bare shins. She could feel the gaze of the scarred guard resting heavily on the back of her neck, waiting for the single word from his king that would permit him to draw his blade and end her life. But as Clara stared up through her wet eyelashes at the broken man on the iron throne, the absolute terror paralyzing her chest began to shift, mutating into something she hadn't expected. A profound, aching recognition. She knew what it meant to be looked at as a piece of trash, an unwanted remnant of a better past. She knew the exact flavor of the bitter, toxic isolation that rolled off the king in waves. "I am Clara," she whispered, her voice trembling but carrying clearly across the cavernous, silent hall. She forced herself to sit back on her heels, refusing to tuck her chin in complete submission, lifting her stormy blue eyes to meet his lethal silver gaze. Clara Sullivan. Evelyn is my stepsister. My stepmother Beatrice forced me into that carriage. She lied to your emissaries. She hid me away in the servant quarters for years, keeping my existence a secret from the High Registry so she could use me as a scapegoat if a day like this ever came. Ethan didn't blink. His massive hands, covered in thick pale scars across the knuckles, gripped the armrests of his iron throne so tightly the metal groaned under his strength. A scapegoat, he repeated, the word rolling out of his mouth like a curse. You think I am a punishment, then? A death sentence wrapped in a royal marriage treaty? That is exactly what she thinks you are, Clara said, her voice growing stronger, fueled by a sudden burning spark of indignation. She thinks you are a broken, bitter monster ruling over a graveyard. She traded me away to spare her precious daughter from what she called a living hell. She thinks I am nothing but a worthless orphan, an omega with no pack backing, so if you kill me in a fit of rage, no one will ever march to avenge me. She took a ragged breath, her chest heaving. But she is wrong about one thing. I am not here to deceive you. I am here because I had no choice. Kill me if you must to protect your honor, your grace. But do not kill me for a lie I had no part in creating. A heavy, dangerous silence descended upon the great hall once more. The roaring fireplace popped, throwing a shower of bright orange sparks against the hearth. Ethan stared down at her, his sharp jaw tight, his silver eyes tracking the steady, rapid pulse jumping in her neck. He was a werewolf king. He could hear the frantic, rhythmic thumping of her heart. He knew she wasn't lying. He knew she was utterly terrified, yet there was a fierce, unbroken core of dignity inside her that refused to beg for her life. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan reached to his side. His large hand wrapped around the foam-padded handle of his right steel crutch, then the left. Clara held her breath, her eyes widening as she watched the king prepare to stand. It was an agonizingly slow process. With a low, guttural growl of pure, unadulterated frustration, Ethan forced his massive weight upward. The heavy steel crutches clicked loudly against the stone floor, the metal braces locking around his forearms with a harsh, mechanical snap. His legs, though covered by thick, dark trousers, shook visibly under the immense strain of supporting his towering frame. He stood at an imposing 6'5", but it was clear that every single inch of that height was bought with a terrifying amount of physical agony. His breathing became shallow, a thin sheen of sweat breaking out across his rugged forehead as he stabilized himself, leaning heavily into the metal supports. He took a single step forward, the rubber tip of his right crutch thudding heavily against the floor, followed by the dragging, stiff motion of his left leg. The sound was methodical, agonizing, and entirely devoid of the graceful, lethal fluidity a ruling alpha should possess. You think you know what pain is, Clara? Ethan rumbled, halting a mere 3 feet away from her. Up close, his scent hit her like a physical wave. Rich mahogany, ozone, and the sharp metallic tang of constant burning anger. You think you are the only one who has been discarded? Look at me. I am the High Ruler of the Northern Wastes, and I cannot even cross my own hall without the aid of cold steel. My own lords plot my execution in the shadows. My borders are bleeding. And now, the Sullivan pack insults me by sending a penniless, ragged stray instead of the bride promised by blood. Before Clara could answer, a side door to the hall clicked open, and a middle-aged woman wearing a crisp, dark woolen gown hurried inside. She had kind, dark eyes and a streak of silver running through her pinned-back brown hair. Her face paled slightly as she took in the scene, the king standing in obvious pain and a drenched, shivering girl kneeling on the floor. "Your Grace," the woman said, bowing her head deeply. "The High Council members are already gathering in the solar. Lord Thomas is demanding to see the new queen. We must handle this before." She trailed off, her gaze landing softly on Clara, her expression instantly softening with profound maternal pity. "Not now, Martha," Ethan snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't look away from Clara. "This girl is an imposter. Her stepmother played us for fools." Martha stepped forward, entirely unfazed by the king's terrifying temper. She had clearly served him for a very long time. "With all due respect, Ethan, look at her. She's freezing to death. If she stays in those wet clothes for another 10 minutes, she won't live long enough for the council to decide what to do with her. Imposter or not, she is a living being under our roof. Ethan's jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked violently in his cheek. He looked at Clara's blue, shivering lips, then down at her bare, mud-stained feet. The primal, protective instinct inherent to every true alpha flared deep within his eyes, warring against his bitter pride. "Take her," Ethan finally growled, turning his massive frame around with a clumsy, agonizingly heavy pivot that clearly shot a bolt of lightning pain up his spine, forcing a sharp hiss from his lips. "Clean her up. Dress her in something befitting a guest. I will deal with the council. But she does not leave the Western Tower. If she tries to run, lock her in the cells." "Thank you, Your Grace," Martha whispered. She rushed forward, wrapping a warm dry wool shawl around Clara's trembling shoulders and gently pulling her to her feet. Clara's legs nearly gave out, but Martha held her firmly, guiding her away from the Iron Throne and toward the spiral stone staircase leading to the upper levels of the fortress. As they walked away, Clara couldn't help but look back over her shoulder. Ethan was leaning heavily against his steel crutches, staring into the dying embers of the fireplace, his massive shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of the entire world. He looked so incredibly large yet so utterly devastatingly alone. Martha led Clara up several flights of stairs to a spacious stone-walled bedroom in the Western Tower. A large bed piled high with thick furs sat against the wall, and a copper tub steaming with hot water had already been prepared. "Get into the water, child," Martha said softly, shutting the heavy wooden door behind them. "Let the heat get into your bones. I will fetch you some clean clothes and something to eat." Clara didn't hesitate. She stripped off the ruined wet cotton dress and sank into the scalding water, letting out a ragged sob as the warmth finally began to soothe her aching, exhausted muscles. She washed the mud from her skin and hair, watching the water turn a murky brown, symbolizing the shedding of her old life. When she stepped out, Martha had returned with a simple but beautiful long-sleeved dress of deep forest green wool and a tray of thick beef stew with warm bread. Clara ate like a starving animal, her hands shaking as she tore the bread apart. Martha sat quietly across from her, watching her with a gentle, discerning gaze. "You aren't what he expected," Martha said softly, breaking the silence. "But perhaps you are exactly what this fortress needs." "He hates me," Clara whispered, staring down at her empty bowl. "He looks at me and sees an insult. A reminder of his weakness." "He doesn't hate you, Clara. He hates himself," Martha sighed, leaning forward. 2 years ago, Ethan was the most glorious alpha this world had ever seen. He ruled with absolute fairness, but he was fierce. Then came the ambush at the Shattered Peaks. He was betrayed from within, set up by someone close to him. His legs were crushed, his wolf spirit suppressed by a rare, silver-laced poison that still burns in his blood. The lords of the High Council, led by a vile man named Lord Thomas, have been trying to usurp his throne ever since. They forced him into this marriage alliance, hoping to bring a strong Pax alliance to the capital. When they find out your stepmother sent you instead of Evelyn, Thomas will use it as an excuse to declare Ethan unfit to rule, claiming he cannot even command the respect of a minor pack. Clara's heart sank. She hadn't just been sent away to save Evelyn. She had been dropped into the center of a deadly political viper's nest. If Ethan fell, she would fall with him. "Is there no cure for the poison?" Clara asked, her voice filled with a sudden, intense curiosity. "None that we have found," Martha said, shaking her head sadly. "It requires a rare lunar lily that only grows in the deepest, most treacherous parts of the northern bogs, and Ethan refuses to send his remaining loyal guards on a suicide mission. He has given up on himself, child. He believes he is destined to die a cripple, betrayed and forgotten." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, a memory flashing in her mind. Her father had been a renowned pack healer before his untimely death. She remembered reading his hidden journals, tucked away beneath the floorboards of her old room before Beatrice seized them. He had written extensively about the lunar lily, noting that it wasn't just a physical cure, but a catalyst that required the pure, untainted energy of a bonded mate's touch to fully neutralize silver poison. Suddenly, a loud, crashing sound echoed from the corridor outside, followed by the deep, booming voice of a man shouting in anger. "I don't care about his orders, Martha. I am entering that room." The heavy wooden door to Clara's chamber was violently flung open, slamming against the stone wall. Standing in the doorway was a tall, sleekly dressed man with slicked-back blonde hair and a cruel, calculating smile. His eyes were a sharp, predatory yellow, and he wore the heavy gold medallion of a High Council lord. Well, 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 the man sneered, his eyes sliding down Clara's body with a repulsive, violating intensity. What do we have here? This isn't the pampered Evelyn Sullivan. This is a common maid masquerading as royalty. The king's new bride is nothing but a fraud. Clara stood up, her pulse racing, her small wolf pacing frantically inside her mind. The danger wasn't just knocking at the door anymore. It had just broken it down. Lord Thomas, you have no right to breach the Queen's private quarters. Martha cried out, stepping forward with a ferocity that defied her age, bravely placing her body between Clara and the menacing Alpha Lord. Queen. Thomas scoffed, a bark of cruel, mocking laughter rattling from his chest as he took a predatory step into the room. He didn't just look at Clara. His yellow eyes tore through her defenses, calculating her worth and finding it utterly lacking. This ragged little creature is no queen. She smells of cheap soap and desperation, not the purebred Sullivan lineage we were promised. She is an imposter. A servant girl sent to mock the High Council and by extension, to prove just how utterly toothless our crippled king has truly become. Clara stood her ground, her fingers curling tightly into the thick fabric of her forest green wool dress. The small, suppressed wolf within her, an omega spirit that had been beaten down by years of Beatrice's psychological cruelty, suddenly flared to life, sparked by a raw, white-hot rush of adrenaline. I am no servant, Lord Thomas, Clara declared, her voice ringing out with a chilling, unexpected clarity that made the Alpha Lord pause. I am Clara Sullivan, the eldest daughter of Alpha Richard Sullivan. My blood is as pure as my stepsister's. If you have a grievance with how this alliance was negotiated, you take it up with my stepmother, not me. But you will not stand in my quarters and insult my birthright. Thomas's eyes narrowed into dangerous, lethal slits. He hadn't expected a terrified girl in a strange fortress to strike back with such venom. A viper with a tongue, he hissed, his hand dropping to the ornate silver hilt of the dagger at his waist. It doesn't matter who your father was, girl. You are a fraud and this marriage treaty is void. I am going to drag you down to the Great Hall, and before the entire assembled council, I will strip you of that dress and expose you for the lying parasite you are. And then I will formally strip Ethan Hunt of his crown. He lunged forward, his large, scarred hand reaching out to grab Clara's wrist. Martha screamed, rushing forward to pull him back, but Thomas callously backhanded the older woman, sending her crashing to the stone floor with a pained groan. Leave her alone. Clara screamed, dodging his grasp. She grabbed a heavy, solid silver candlestick from the bedside table, raising it defensively, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. But before Thomas could lay another hand on her, a terrifying, earth-shaking sound reverberated through the stone walls of the tower. It wasn't a roar and it wasn't a shout. It was the heavy, rhythmic, thunderous thud of steel forearm crutches striking the floor with lethal, furious intent. Thud, thud, thud. The temperature in the room plummeted to a sub-zero freeze as an oppressive, suffocating blanket of raw, unadulterated alpha power poured through the open doorway. It was so thick, so dense with murderous rage, that Lord Thomas instantly froze, his yellow eyes widening in sudden primal panic. He slowly turned around, his hands rising instinctively as a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. Standing in the doorway, his massive frame completely filling the entrance, was Alpha King Ethan Hunt. He wasn't leaning weakly now. His thick leather-clad forearms were locked into his steel crutches, his broad chest heaving with a terrifying rhythmic cadence. His face was a mask of pure demonic fury, his jaw clamped so hard it looked as if it might shatter, and his eyes were no longer silver. They had turned a blinding, luminescent, feral white, the terrifying hallmark of a true Alpha King pushed past the brink of sanity. Thomas, Ethan growled. The sound was so low, so saturated with alpha frequency, that the windows of the tower room began to rattle and vibrate within their lead frames. You have exactly 3 seconds to remove your hands from my wife, or I will forget that I am confined to these crutches, and I will use your spine to pave my courtyard. Your Grace. Thomas stammered, backing away from Clara, his previous bravado evaporating into thin air. She is a fraud. I was only verifying the rumors. The Sullivan pack deceived us. This girl is an Omega stray, not the bride we agreed upon. I was protecting the Council's honor. The Council has no honor while you breathe its air, Ethan snarled. He took a heavy, methodical step forward. The tip of his crutch cracked the stone floor beneath him. He didn't care about his trembling legs. The sheer force of his furious will was driving him forward. Clara Sullivan is my wife. The moment she crossed the threshold of the Blackwood Fortress and I chose not to executioner her, she became a ward of the crown. She is the queen of the northern wastes. And any man who breaches her chambers, any man who strikes my staff, and any man who dares touch her without my explicit command, is committing high treason. Ethan, be reasonable. Thomas cried, his back now pinned against the stone wall near the window. The other lords will not accept this. They want a strong alliance. They will declare you unfit. Let them try, Ethan whispered, the quietness of his voice infinitely more terrifying than a roar. He turned his gaze to the scarred guard who had followed him up the stairs. Gideon, remove Lord Thomas from my sight. Throw him into the courtyard. Let him think about the definition of treason while he sits in the freezing rain. If he speaks another word, cut out his tongue. With pleasure, your grace. Gideon smiled, a savage, bloodthirsty grin. He stepped into the room, grabbed Thomas by the collar of his fine velvet tunic, and effortlessly dragged the protesting, shouting lord out into the corridor. The heavy silence that followed was thick with the scent of ozone and raw adrenaline. Martha slowly pushed herself up from the floor, rubbing her bruised cheek. Clara immediately dropped her silver candlestick and rushed to the older woman's side, helping her to a chair. Are you all right, Martha? Clara asked, her voice trembling with deep concern, completely ignoring her own racing heart. I am fine, child. Just a bit shaken, Martha whispered, giving Clara a reassuring maternal squeeze of the hand. She looked up at Ethan, who was standing perfectly still in the center of the room, his breathing heavy, his white eyes slowly fading back to that deep, intensely lonely silver. Leave us, Martha, Ethan ordered softly, his voice rough and strained. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, and Clara could see the immense physical toll it was taking on him to remain standing. His massive shoulders trembled slightly, and his knuckles were white as he gripped his steel supports. Martha nodded silently, giving Clara a supportive look before slipping out of the room, closing the broken door as best she could behind her. Clara stood up slowly, turning to face the crippled king. She didn't cower. She didn't look at his legs with the pity he so clearly despised. Instead, she looked straight into his silver eyes, seeing the excruciating pain he was trying so desperately to hide. You didn't have to do that, Clara whispered, her voice soft, a gentle contrast to the violence that had just unfolded. You could have let him take me. It would have solved your problem with the council. You could have blamed my stepmother and declared war on my pack. Ethan let out a harsh, self-deprecating chuckle, leaning his weight heavily into his crutches as his left leg buckled slightly. And let that sniveling coward believe he dictates who stays and who goes in my fortress? Never. He stared at her, his gaze intense, stripping away her defenses. But don't mistake my protection for kindness, Clara. You are in just as much danger now as you were in your stepmother's house. By claiming you as my queen in front of Thomas, I have tied your fate to mine. If my enemies overthrow me, they will slaughter you too. Then we will just have to make sure they don't overthrow you, Clara said softly, taking a brave, tentative step toward him. Ethan frozen, his eyes tracking her movement. You speak as if you have a choice, girl. You are a pawn in a game you don't understand. I understand more than you think, Ethan, she said, using his first name for the very first time, the sound of it causing a visible shiver to run through his massive frame. I know about the ambush at the Shattered Peaks. I know about the silver poison burning in your blood, crippling your wolf in your legs. And I know how to cure it. Ethan's silver eyes widened in absolute shock, a volatile mix of hope, suspicion and sudden dangerous intrigue flaring in the depths of his gaze. The room grew dead silent as he stared at the 18-year-old girl who had just shattered his entire world with a single sentence. A suffocating, stunned silence descended upon the room. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace and the ragged, shallow breathing of the king. Ethan's silver eyes locked onto Clara with a lethal intensity, his large hands gripping the handles of his steel crutches so hard the rubber pads groaned under the immense pressure. What did you just say? Ethan whispered, his voice dropping into a register so low and dangerous it made the hair on Clara's arms stand up. He took a heavy, deliberate step closer, the metal tip of his crutch thudding violently against the stone floor. "Thud. Do not play games with me, girl. Do not invent cruel lies to buy your safety. Many grand maesters and high-pack healers have come through these gates, promising cures and delivering nothing but false hope. If you are mocking my condition, I will forget every shred of mercy I have shown you." "I am not mocking you, Ethan," Clara said, her voice remarkably steady despite the ferocious alpha power radiating from him. She didn't flinch as he stopped mere inches away from her, his towering frame casting a massive dark shadow over her. "My father was Richard Sullivan. Before my stepmother systematically erased his name from our pack's history, he was one of the most brilliant medical minds and traditional pack healers on the continent. He spent decades researching rare toxicities, specifically the silver-laced poisons used by rogue factions to suppress alpha wolves." Ethan's sharp jaw clenched, his eyes searching her pale, beautiful face for any sign of deception. He found none. Only a deep, agonizing sincerity that mirrored his own hidden depths. "The silver poison in my blood is mutated," he rasped, a sudden raw vulnerability leaking into his gravelly voice. "It doesn't just suppress my shift. It eats away at the neural pathways to my lower spine. Every single second I stand before you, it feels like liquid fire is being poured through my bones. If there was a cure, my loyal guards would have found it. They haven't found it because they don't know what to look for and they don't know how to activate it," Clara explained softly, taking a brave step closer, closing the physical distance between them until she could feel the intense, radiant heat radiating from his broad chest. "The cure requires the lunar lily, a nocturnal plant that blooms only under a full moon in the deepest, most toxic marshes of the northern bogs. But the plant alone is just a catalyst. My father's journals explicitly stated that the lily's extract is completely inert unless it is chemically synthesized and activated by the pure, uninhibited energy of a true destined mate's touch. Without the mate bond, the lily is nothing but a deadly poison itself." Ethan let out a sharp, bitter breath, his eyes darkening with a mixture of profound frustration and despair. "A mate bond? Then I am truly doomed. Look at me, Claire. I am a broken king locked in an isolated fortress. My wolf spirit is paralyzed, locked behind a wall of silver agony. I cannot sense a mate. I cannot trigger a bond. I am half a man." "You are not half a man," Clara said fiercely, her stormy blue eyes burning with an intense conviction that caught him entirely off guard. Her hand moved instinctively, her small, delicate fingers reaching out toward his scarred, massive arm. The moment her fingertips brushed against the dark leather of his sleeve, a violent, invisible shockwave of pure electricity ripped through the air between them. The torches in the room flared a brilliant, blinding blue. A gasp caught in Clara's throat as a sudden, overwhelming wave of warmth flooded her veins, chasing away the freezing chill of the fortress. Inside her mind, the small, quiet Omega wolf that had been dormant for years suddenly threw its head back and let out a joyous, triumphant howl. Ethan stiffened violently. His luminescent silver eyes widened in absolute shock as a powerful golden aura rippled across his skin. For the briefest fraction of a second, the heavy, dead weight in his legs vanished, replaced by a surge of raw, untamed strength. The phantom scent of crushed pine needles, heavy rain, and sweet vanilla exploded in his senses, wrapping around his soul like a warm embrace. It was the mate bond. Faint, suppressed by the heavy poison in his blood, but undeniably beautifully alive. Ethan reeled back, his steel crutches clattering loudly against the floor as he lost his balance, his massive frame crashing back onto the edge of the large fur-lined bed. He stared up at Clara as if she were a ghost, his breathing heavy and chaotic, his chest heaving under his leather armor. It's you," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 2 long years. "Hope. Raw, terrifying hope. You are my destined mate. That is why your scent didn't reject me. That is why my alpha aura didn't crush your spirit when you knelt in the hall." "Yes," Clara whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she looked down at her hands, still tingling from the electric touch. "My stepmother thought she was sending me to my execution. She thought she was trading me away like a piece of worthless garbage to save Evelyn. But she didn't know. She didn't realize she was sending me directly into the arms of the only man who could ever truly cherish me. Before Ethan could answer, the heavy silence of the tower was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps running down the corridor. The door was pushed open and Gideon, the scarred guard, burst inside, his face pale and tight with anxiety. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion," Gideon breathed, bowing quickly. "But we have a major problem. Lord Thomas has just left the fortress gates, escorted by his personal elite guard. But before he left, he sent an encrypted message via carrier Raven to the capital. Our spies intercepted a partial script. He is rallying the High Council lords, claiming that you have brought a treasonous impostor into the royal house. He has called for an emergency tribunal at the winter solstice, just 5 days from now. If we cannot prove your physical strength and validate the purity of your queen's lineage by then, they will march an army to the gates of Blackwood to strip your crown by force." Clara's heart dropped into her stomach. 5 days. They only had 5 days before the Vipers closed in for the kill. Ethan's face hardened into a mask of pure, ruthless determination, the vulnerability from moments before locking away behind a wall of cold steel. He looked up at Gideon, his silver eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "Assemble the elite guard, Gideon. Prepare the winter gear. We are marching into the northern bogs tonight." "Tonight, Your Grace?" Gideon gasped. "But the bogs are crawling with feral rogue factions and lethal quicksand. In your condition, traveling through that terrain is a suicide mission." "I am not going alone," Ethan growled, his gaze sliding over to Clara, his voice softening just a fraction, a complex blend of growing attraction and fierce protectiveness swirling in his eyes. "My queen is coming with me. She knows the layout of the bogs from her father's maps, and she is the only one who can harvest the lily without destroying its properties." He looked directly into Clara's eyes. "Are you ready to face the darkness with me, Clara? The path ahead is full of death and betrayal. If you stay here, you might be safe for a few days. If you come with me, you might not survive the night." Clara took a deep breath, her chin lifting as she walked over to the bed, picking up one of his fallen steel crutches and gently placing it back into his scarred hand. Her touch sent another beautiful spark of warmth through his skin. "I have spent 18 years running and hiding from monsters, Ethan," Clara said, her voice filled with an unbreakable, authentic courage. "I am done running. I will walk into the dark with you. We will find that lily, we will break your curse, and together we will take back everything they stole from us." The freezing, toxic miasma of the northern bogs clung to the air like a shroud, turning every breath into a painful, burning gasp. The expedition had been a brutal, unforgiving descent into a living purgatory. 4 hours, the small party had forged through the knee-deep black mire, navigating jagged roots and treacherous pockets of sinking mud under the pale, eerie glow of a fractured winter moon. Ethan refused to be carried. It was an act of pure, agonizing defiance that nearly broke Clara's heart to watch. His heavy iron-braced boots sunk deep into the treacherous silt, requiring an immense, soul-shredding amount of upper-body strength to wrench upward with every single step. His steel forearm crutches were fitted with wide, specialized snow baskets to prevent them from sinking completely into the muck, but the physical toll was catastrophic. Sweat poured down his rugged face despite the sub-zero temperature, his jaw clamped so tight that a thin line of blood trickled from his lip where he had bitten through the pain. Yet every time he stumbled, every time his paralyzed lower spine threatened to drop his massive frame into the freezing swamp, Clara was there. She didn't offer pitying words. Instead, she silently pressed her shoulder against his broad chest, letting her hand slip beneath his heavy leather cloak to rest directly over his lower back. The moment her bare palm made contact with his skin, the mate bond erupted between them like a roaring furnace. Pure, golden kinetic energy flooded from Clara's core into Ethan's neural pathways, temporarily searing away the agonizing bite of the silver poison and giving his trembling legs the strength to take another step. "You are burning yourself out for me," Ethan rasped, his voice a low, raw wheeze as they halted beneath the skeletal branches of a dead willow tree. The rest of the elite guard, led by a vigilant Gideon, formed a defensive perimeter 50 paces ahead. "I can feel your energy draining, Clara. The bond, it's taking your vital strength to keep me moving." "I don't care," Clara whispered, her face pale but her eyes burning with an unyielding, passionate devotion. She reached up, gently wiping the cold sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of her wool dress. "We are one now, Ethan. Your pain is my pain. I would give you every breath in my lungs if it meant seeing you walk freely again. Ethan stared down at her, his luminescent silver eyes swirling with a profound, overwhelming vulnerability. He raised a heavy, scarred hand, his thumb gently tracing the line of her cheekbone. I spent 2 years praying for death in that dark fortress, he murmured, his deep voice cracking with raw emotion. I thought the gods had abandoned me. But they didn't abandon me, Clara. They were just waiting until I was broken enough to realize that my true strength didn't lie in my crown, or my wolf. It lay in you. Before Clara could answer, the profound tenderness of the moment was violently shattered. How touching, a sharp, drippingly sarcastic voice echoed from the dense fog behind them. A tragic king and his little placeholder queen, playing at romance in the mud. Ethan instantly pivoted, his steel crutches snapping into place with lethal precision as he pulled Clara behind his massive frame. Out of the swirling gray mist stepped a dozen heavily armed warriors, their armor bearing the jagged crest of Lord Thomas's rogue faction. But it wasn't Thomas leading them. Stepping to the forefront of the enemy line, wrapped in an exquisite white fur coat that looked entirely out of place in the filthy bog, was Beatrice Sullivan. And standing right beside her, a cruel, triumphant smirk plastered across her face, was Clara's stepsister, Evelyn. Clara's blood ran completely cold. Her hands began to shake as she stared at the woman who had tormented her for a decade. Stepmother. She breathed, the old, instinctual terror trying to claw its way back into her chest. Don't call me that, you pathetic little thief, Beatrice spat, her eyes flashing with a venomous, unadulterated hatred. You stole what belonged to my Evelyn. You were supposed to be a compliant lamb sent to slaughter, a worthless distraction to keep this crippled freak occupied while we finalized the transition of power. How dare you survive? You set this up, Ethan growled, his alpha frequency vibrating through the swamp, making the black water ripple around his boots. The ambush at the Shattered Peaks 2 years ago. The silver poison. It wasn't a rogue faction. The Sullivan pack was behind it. Beatrice threw her head back and laughed, a shrill, terrifying sound. Oh, don't give my late husband credit for that. Richard was a fool, completely blind to the real world. It was me, Ethan. I orchestrated the ambush with Lord Thomas. We needed you neutralized so Thomas could take the throne, allowing the Sullivan pack unrestricted access to the northern trade routes. But you just wouldn't die. You crawled back to your fortress like a stubborn dog. And when Thomas forced the marriage treaty, Evelyn chimed in, stepping forward, her eyes scanning Ethan's broad chest with a sudden repulsive greed. We realized Ethan's wolf spirit was still too strong. We needed to inject an agent of despair into his house. We were going to send me so I could slowly poison the rest of your bloodline from within. But then Thomas warned us that Ethan's remaining loyalists were getting suspicious. So, my brilliant mother decided to send Clara. We figured a broken, bitter king would see a ragged impostor as an insult, fly into an alpha rage and tear her apart. It would have given the High Council the perfect excuse to execute you for murdering a High Lord's daughter. Clara staggered back, a devastating realization crashing through her mind like a physical blow. The betrayal wasn't just a sudden act of cruelty. It was a calculated, multi-year conspiracy that had cost her father his life and Ethan his freedom. She had been weaponized against her own destined mate before she even knew he existed. But it seems we underestimated your survival instincts, Clara, Beatrice sneered, drawing a gleaming silver-plated crossbow from beneath her fur cloak, pointing the wicked bolt directly at Clara's chest. It doesn't matter. Lord Thomas's army is already marching on the Blackwood fortress as we speak. The High Council has already signed the decree. And as for the two of you, you will die right here in this swamp, and the bog will swallow your secrets forever. Gideon! Ethan roared. But before his elite guard could sprint back through the mud to breach the distance, Beatrice pulled the trigger. The heavy thrum of the crossbow's string sliced through the air, sending the silver bolt flying straight toward Clara's heart. The world slowed to a sickening, agonizing crawl. The sharp twang of the crossbow's string reverberated through the freezing air like a death knell. The silver bolt flashed under the pale moonlight, a streak of lethal, gleaming metal aimed squarely at Clara's heart. Clara gasped, her feet rooting to the treacherous mud, completely paralyzed by the sudden appearance of her childhood tormentors and the ultimate betrayal of her father's memory. She braced for the impact, closing her eyes as she prepared for the cold bite of death. But the impact never came. With a raw, guttural roar that sounded less like a man and more like a dying, ferocious beast, Ethan threw himself sideways. He didn't use his crutches. He discarded them entirely, letting the metal supports clatter into the black mire. Driven by pure, unadulterated mate instinct, his massive, broad-shouldered frame collapsed over Clara, shielding her body with his own. But the heavy silver bolt tore through Ethan's thick leather cloak and buried itself deep into the flesh of his shoulder, right near the base of his neck. A sharp, agonizing hiss escaped Ethan's lips as he crashed heavily into the freezing mud, dragging Clara down with him. The moment the silver-plated weapon pierced his skin, the mutated poison already running through his veins reacted violently with the fresh silver. A brilliant, horrific vein of pulsing black lines erupted across his jaw and neck, burning beneath his skin like liquid charcoal. His body convulsed, a violent tremor racking his massive frame as his luminescent silver eyes instantly went dull, rolling back into his head. "Ethan. No. No, please God, no." Clara screamed, her voice cracking into a ragged, desperate sob as she scrambled through the mud, pulling his heavy head into her lap. She slapped her hands over the wound, but the blood pouring from it was dark, almost black, tainted by the rapid spread of the systemic toxin. "Ethan, look at me. Keep your eyes on me. You can't leave me, please." "Clara." Ethan rasped, his voice barely a breath, his fingers twitching weakly against her knee. The terrifying Alpha King had been reduced to a fragile, dying man in seconds. "Run. You have to run." "Well, look at that," Beatrice chuckled, her voice dripping with sadistic satisfaction as she calmly reloaded another bolt into her crossbow. Beside her, Evelyn crossed her arms, a look of utter disgust and smug triumph on her face. The great, invincible Alpha King brought down by a single toy. How pathetic. He really was just a broken dog waiting to be put out of his misery. "Finish them, Mother," Evelyn sneered, stepping closer, her fine boots sinking slightly into the silt. "The rogue warriors are already engaging his pathetic guard in the fog. We don't have time to waste. Lord Thomas expects us back at the capital before the solstice sun rises." Through the thick, rolling gray fog, Clara could hear the chaotic, terrifying sounds of metal clashing against metal, the guttural shouts of Gideon and the remaining elite guards as they fought desperately against Beatrice's hidden ambushers. They were completely cut off. There was no help coming. Claire looked down at Ethan. His breathing was becoming shallow, a death rattle beginning to form in his chest. The golden light of their mate bond, which had felt so vibrant and warm just minutes ago, was fading rapidly, flickering out like a candle in a tempest. The sheer weight of hopelessness pressed down on her chest, a physical suffocation that threatened to break her mind. She had found her destined mate, her sanctuary, her king, only to watch him bleed out in a nameless swamp at the hands of the vipers who had stolen her life. "Goodbye, Clara," Beatrice sneered, raising the crossbow once more, aligning the sight directly between Clara's eyes. "Tell your foolish father that I spent every last dime of his estate." Clara didn't run. She didn't beg. Instead, a profound, terrifying calm washed over her, born from the absolute depths of despair. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against Ethan's cold, sweat-soaked cheek, her tears mingling with the black blood on his shoulder. "If he dies, I die with him," she thought, her inner Omega wolf curling around Ethan's fading spirit, refusing to let him cross the veil alone. "We go together." As Beatrice's finger began to squeeze the trigger, a strange, rhythmic pulsing began to vibrate beneath Clara's knees. It wasn't the sound of the battle and it wasn't the wind. It was a deep, thumping heartbeat originating from the very soil of the bog beneath them. Right beside Ethan's trembling right hand, the black mud began to glow. A faint, ethereal, luminescent blue light pierced through the murky water. Slowly, beautifully, a tightly furled, crystalline white flower pushed its way through the frozen silt, its petals unfurling under the direct beam of the fractured winter moon. The lunar lily. It hadn't been miles deep in the marsh. It had been right here, dormant, waiting for the exact catastrophic convergence of a dying Alpha King, the blood of his line, and the pure, unconditional, sacrificial love of his destined mate to call it into bloom. But as Beatrice noticed the glowing light and let out a sharp gasp of alarm, Clara realized the most terrifying truth of all. The plant was within arm's reach, but Ethan was already unconscious, his heart stopping, and she had absolutely no idea how to extract the cure before the crossbow bolt took her life. "What is that cursed thing?" Beatrice shrieked, her finger freezing on the trigger as the ethereal blue light of the lunar lily sliced through the murky gray fog, casting a brilliant celestial glow across Clara's tear-stained face. The lily. Evelyn gasped, her smug composure instantly shattering into wild panic. Mother, she found it. Kill her. Kill her now before she can touch it. But Clara didn't wait for the bolt to fly. Driven by a sudden electric surge of absolute unadulterated clarity, she lunged sideways. Her bare hand plunged directly into the freezing, glowing mud, her fingers wrapping around the crystalline stem of the lunar lily. The moment her skin made contact with the petals, a blinding flash of silver-blue light detonated outward. The sheer kinetic force of the magical reaction sent a shockwave ripping through the swamp, knocking Beatrice and Evelyn off their feet and sending them crashing backward into the mire. Clara felt a violent rush of ancient ancestral energy flood up her arm, burning with the memory of her father's teachings. The lily is inert unless activated by a destined mate's touch. She didn't have a mortar or pestle. She didn't have time for a chemical synthesis. She had only her body, her blood, and her absolute refusal to let her mate die. Without a second thought, Clara brought the glowing flower to her lips, biting into the bitter, crystalline petals. She crushed the glowing nectar in her mouth, ignoring the searing, icy heat that threatened to numb her throat. She scrambled back to Ethan's motionless body, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She leaned down over him. He was completely still. His heart had stopped beating, the black, toxic veins fully encasing his rugged face. Clara pressed her lips firmly against his cold, blood-stained mouth. She breathed the activated, luminescent essence of the lunar lily straight into his lungs, pouring every ounce of her soul, her life transitions and her fierce, unbroken love into the kiss. The golden light of their mate bond erupted from her chest, swirling in a violent, beautiful vortex with the blue light of the lily, forcing the pure, glowing liquid down his throat and into his dormant system. For 3 agonizing, breathless seconds nothing happened. The swamp fell dead silent. The sounds of clashing swords in the distance seemed to fade into nothingness. Is he dead? Evelyn whimpered, pushing herself up from the mud, her fine white coat completely ruined. Then Ethan's chest violently heaved. A deep, gasping, thunderous breath tore out of his throat. His eyes snapped open, and they were no longer a dull, dying silver. They were a blinding, incandescent, radioactive white, burning with the raw, untamed fury of a resurrected god. The black, toxic veins covering his skin didn't just fade. They literally shattered, dissolving into microscopic silver ash that evaporated into the air. The heavy, silver-plated crossbow bolt buried in his shoulder was violently repelled, shooting out of his flesh by the sheer, explosive force of his rapid regeneration. The wound sealed itself in a fraction of a second, leaving behind smooth, unblemished skin. Deep within his physical core, a sound echoed that made the very foundations of the continent tremble. It was the loud, metallic, spiritual snap of a curse being shattered. For 2 long years his wolf had been locked behind a wall of silver agony. Now that wall was dust. Ethan pushed himself up from the mud. He didn't reach for his steel crutches. He didn't need them. He stood up smoothly, effortlessly, his towering 6'5" frame rising to its full, majestic height. The agonizing tremors in his legs were completely gone, replaced by a terrifying liquid fluidity that radiated absolute, apex predator dominance. A gasp of pure, unadulterated terror escaped Beatrice's lips as she scrambled backward on her hands and knees, the loaded crossbow slipping from her trembling fingers. No, it's impossible. The maester said it was incurable. You're a cripple. You're supposed to be broken. Ethan didn't answer with words. He threw his head back and let out a cataclysmic, earth-shaking roar that tore through the fog like a hurricane. The sheer volume of his alpha vocalization sent a shockwave through the swamp, instantly paralyzing every single rogue warrior fighting in the distance. He looked down at Clara, his white eyes softening into a deep, burning silver that held a lifetime of gratitude, passion, and unbroken devotion. He extended his massive, unscarred hand to her. "Thank you, my queen," Ethan whispered, his deep voice vibrating with a power she had never heard before. "Now let us show them what happens when you threaten the high house of the wastes." Clara smiled through her tears, placing her small hand in his. The electric warmth between them was no longer a faint spark. It was a raging, invincible wildfire. The turning point had passed. The crippled king was dead. The true Alpha King had returned, and it was time for a reckoning. The air around Ethan didn't just crackle, it shattered. The raw, cataclysmic force of a fully restored Alpha King warped the very atmosphere of the northern bogs. The thick gray fog that had hidden the ambushers was violently ripped apart, blown away by a localized vortex of pure, radiating alpha pressure. Beatrice Sullivan screamed, a pathetic high-pitched shriek of absolute terror as she tried to crawl away through the freezing slime, her manicured nails ripping against the jagged rocks. Evelyn stood completely frozen, her jaw slack, her eyes wide with a horrific realization as she looked up, and up, at the towering, flawless silhouette of the man she had mocked as a broken freak. Ethan didn't spare them another glance. He leaned down, his massive, powerful hands moving with a breathtaking liquid grace as he scooped Clara up into his arms. He lifted her effortlessly against his broad chest, holding her as if she were the most precious, sacred relic in existence. "Stay close to my heart, Clara," Ethan murmured, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that sent a thrill of safety straight into her soul. "The reckoning has arrived." With a single, explosive leap that defied human limits, Ethan bounded through the swamp. He didn't need steel crutches. His legs, now fully infused with the golden, uninhibited power of the mate bond, propelled him across the treacherous terrain like a streak of midnight lightning. Within seconds he crashed into the clearing where the main battle was raging. Gideon and the remaining 3 loyal elite guards were pinned against a wall of black stone, bleeding heavily from multiple gashes, their swords notched and bent as they fought off a dozen of Lord Thomas's highly trained rogue mercenaries. "Hold your ground," Gideon roared, coughing up dark blood, raising his blade for what he clearly believed was his final fatal stand. Then the sky seemed to fall. Ethan descended into the center of the clearing like a vengeful deity. The moment his boots hit the stone floor, a shockwave of kinetic alpha force erupted outward, knocking all 12 mercenaries off their feet and sending them crashing into the rocks. My king," Gideon stammered, his sword slipping from his numb fingers as he stared at Ethan. His eyes traveled from the king's perfectly balanced, unbraced legs up to his glowing, luminescent silver eyes. A fierce, wild grin broke through the blood on Gideon's face. "The king is whole. The king has returned." The rogue mercenaries scrambled to their feet, their faces pale, their weapons trembling in their hands. They were elite killers, but they were looking at a living legend reborn. "You serve Lord Thomas," Ethan growled, his voice carrying the terrifying weight of absolute, unconditional authority. "You breached my borders. You ambushed my queen. You sought to bury the truth in the mud. Your sentence is execution." Ethan didn't even need to shift into his wolf form to unleash hell. Moving with a blinding, terrifying speed, he moved through the clearing like a hurricane of retribution. With raw, unadulterated physical strength, he disarmed the first 3 mercenaries with a single sweeping backhand that shattered their iron breastplates. He swept his leg out, catching 2 more in the shins, the audible crack of their bones echoing across the clearing as they collapsed, screaming in agony. Clara watched from the safety of a high stone ledge where Ethan had gently placed her, her heart swelling with an intense, fierce pride. This was her mate. This was the man who had been discarded by the world, now claiming his absolute dominance over the vipers who had sought to destroy him. Within 90 seconds the clearing fell dead silent. The rogue mercenaries were either unconscious, incapacitated, or kneeling in absolute, unconditional submission, their weapons thrown into the mud. Gideon and the guards immediately fell to their knees, bowing their heads deeply to their resurrected sovereign. "Command us, Alpha King," Gideon breathed. "Bind them," Ethan ordered, his breathing perfectly steady, not a single bead of sweat on his face. "And round up Beatrice and her daughter. They will march with us. We have a tribunal to attend at the capital." The sun was just beginning to rise over the majestic, snow-capped peaks of the capital city, casting a brilliant blood-orange glow across the massive white marble plaza of the High Council Solar. Inside the cavernous, vaulted chamber, Lord Thomas stood before the high altar, a triumphant, arrogant smile on his face. Surrounding him were 40 high lords of the realm, all dressed in their finest ceremonial velvet robes, their faces solemn as they prepared to sign the official document of deposition. "The evidence is absolute, my fellow lords," Thomas projected his voice across the hall, holding aloft a forged document. Ethan Hunt is physically broken, mentally unstable, and has brought a fraudulent, low-born impostor into the royal house to mock our ancient treaties. He is entirely unfit to rule. By signing this decree, we officially strip him of his crown and declare the throne vacant. You declare nothing, Thomas, a booming, thunderous voice suddenly echoed through the solar. The massive 12-foot-tall reinforced oak doors of the High Council chamber didn't just open. They were violently blown off their hinges, flying across the polished marble floor and smashing into the front ranks of the council benches. The entire assembly of lords let out a collective, terrified gasp, rushing backward as a thick, oppressive cloud of raw alpha power poured into the room, so dense it made the high-hanging crystal chandeliers rattle and shake. Walking through the dust and debris, stepping with a slow, majestic and terrifyingly fluid cadence, was Alpha King Ethan Hunt. He wore no heavy cloak to hide his body. He wore a fitted midnight black leather warrior's tunic that accentuated his massive, broad shoulders and his flawless, muscular frame. His stride was perfect, powerful and utterly devoid of any weakness. And right beside him, her hand locked firmly in his, walked Clara Sullivan, dressed in a breathtaking, elegant gown of royal silver silk, her stormy blue eyes burning with an unbreakable, regal dignity. Behind them, Gideon and the elite guards marched, dragging the heavily bound, mud-stained and shivering forms of Lord Thomas's mercenaries, along with Beatrice and Evelyn. Lord Thomas's face went from smug triumph to a horrific, ashen gray in a fraction of a second. He staggered backward against the high altar, his yellow eyes bulging out of his head. No. It's a lie. It's an illusion. You're a cripple. You cannot walk. The only thing that is broken here, Thomas, is your conspiracy, Ethan rumbled, his voice vibrating through the stone walls, causing several high lords to drop to their knees in instinctual submission. Ethan marched straight up to the center of the solar, stopping mere inches from the high altar. He threw the blood-stained silver crossbow bolt onto the council table with a loud, metallic clang. 2 years ago, an ambush at the Shattered Peaks left my elite guards slaughtered and my body paralyzed, Ethan declared, his silver eyes sweeping over the assembly of lords, stripping away their defenses. We were told it was a rogue faction. But the truth has been brought to light. It was an act of high treason orchestrated by Lord Thomas and Beatrice Sullivan, designed to weaken the crown and sell our northern trade routes to the highest bidder. He's lying. He has no proof. Thomas screamed, his voice cracking in wild panic. The proof is kneeling right behind me, Thomas, Clara spoke up, her voice ringing out with an absolute, undeniable authority that silenced the entire room. She pointed a delicate finger at the shivering Beatrice. My stepmother has already confessed to the ambush. She used my father's medical research to synthesize the silver poison that paralyzed the king. And she sent me to the Blackwood Fortress as a weapon, hoping to trigger a political crisis. Clara took a step closer to the council lords, her gaze fierce. But she made one fatal mistake. She didn't realize that I am Richard Sullivan's true heir. And she didn't realize that Ethan Hunt is my destined mate. A profound, stunned murmur rippled through the High Council. A destined mate bond was the most sacred, unbreakable law of nature. It was the ultimate validation of a ruler's right to lead. The poison has been purged, Ethan growled, his white alpha eyes flaring to life for a single terrifying second, sending a wave of absolute submission crashing through the hall. The crown remains whole. Gideon, arrest Lord Thomas for high treason. Strip him of his title, his lands, and his medallion. He will spend the rest of his miserable days in the deepest cells of the wastes. No. Wait. Spare me. Thomas begged as Gideon and 3 towering guards slammed him onto the marble floor, locking his hands in heavy iron cuffs and dragging him away, his pathetic screams echoing down the corridor. Ethan turned his gaze to Beatrice and Evelyn, who were weeping hysterically on the floor, realizing that their wealth, their status, and their lives were entirely forfeit. As for the Sullivan pack, Ethan declared, looking down at Clara with a look of profound, eternal love. The treaty is dissolved. The Sullivan estate and all its lands are hereby transferred entirely to the sole ownership of Queen Clara. Her stepmother and stepsister will be stripped of their status and exiled to the borderlands, never to step foot in the civilized territories again. The High Council lords, realizing the sheer invincible power of the resurrected king and his brilliant new queen, simultaneously fell to their knees, bowing their heads in complete absolute reverence. "Long live Alpha King Ethan! Long live Queen Clara!" They roared in unison, their voices echoing up into the vaulted ceiling. Clara looked up at Ethan, a beautiful radiant smile lighting up her face as he wrapped his massive arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. The Vipers had been crushed. The justice they had denied her for 18 years had finally been delivered. The brilliant summer sun cast a warm golden glow across the rolling green hills of the northern wastes, a breathtaking contrast to the bleak, frozen nightmare that had shrouded the kingdom for 2 long years. The dark clouds that once hung perpetually over the Blackwood fortress had finally broken, chased away by the vibrant, roaring energy of a kingdom reborn. Inside the grand courtyard of the fortress, the heavy iron gates stood wide open. They no longer felt like the jaws of an executioner's trap. Instead, they welcomed a steady stream of laughing merchants, playing children, and peaceful travelers from neighboring packs. The scent of sweet pine, blooming wild lavender, and wood smoke filled the air, replacing the bitter ash and stagnant fear of the past. Clara stood on the polished stone balcony of the Royal Solar, looking out over the thriving kingdom she now called home. She wore a simple but exquisitely elegant dress of soft cream-colored linen, embroidered with golden threads that caught the afternoon light. Her stormy blue eyes were no longer shadowed by terror or grief. They were clear, bright, and filled with a profound, radiant peace. "You're thinking about your father," a deep, velvety voice rumbled behind her. Clara smiled before he even reached her, her soul instantly recognizing the rich, intoxicating scent of mahogany, fresh rain, and sweet vanilla. 2 massive, unscarred arms wrapped tenderly around her waist from behind, pulling her back against a broad, rock-solid chest. Ethan leaned down, pressing a warm, lingering kiss to the side of her neck, his rugged stubble sending a delicious shiver down her spine. He stood tall, perfectly balanced on his own powerful legs, his physical strength a testament to the invincible magic of their bond. The steel crutches were gone, locked away in the deepest vaults of the fortress as a historical relic of a dark era they would never return to. "I am," Clara whispered, leaning her head back against his shoulder, letting her small hands rest over his large, scarred forearms. "I was just thinking about how he always told me that the darkest nights only exist to make the stars shine brighter. I never understood what he meant until I met you, Ethan. Beatrice thought she was discarding me in the wastes, but she accidentally handed me my greatest joy. She handed me my savior," Ethan murmured, his silver eyes swirling with an intense, unyielding devotion as he turned her around in his arms to face him. He reached up, his large thumb gently tracing the smooth curve of her jawline. "For 2 years I was a ghost haunting my own throne. I had given up on my kingdom, my pack, and myself. But the moment you knelt on that cold stone hall, drenched and shivering yet refusing to bend your spirit, you gave me a reason to fight. You didn't just cure my body, Clara. You saved my soul." "We saved each other," Clara corrected softly, standing on her tiptoes to press a gentle, sweet kiss to his lips. The spark of the mate bond flared beautifully between them, a warm, comforting hum of pure energy that verified they were completely, inextricably intertwined for eternity. The heavy oak doors of the Solar clicked open, and Martha stepped out onto the balcony, a wide, maternal smile illuminating her kind face. She held a beautifully bound ledger in her hands. "Forgive the interruption, Your Graces," Martha said, her tone full of deep respect and affection. "But the final reports from the Sullivan territory have arrived. The transition is complete. The pack elders have officially recognized Queen Clara as the sole rightful administrator of the estate. The orphanages and medical clinics your father founded have been fully funded and reopened." "Thank you, Martha," Clara said, her heart swelling with an immense sense of fulfillment. Her father's legacy was no longer erased. It was thriving, a beacon of hope for generations to come. "And what of Beatrice and Evelyn?" Martha's smile took on a slightly vindictive edge. "They are living in a small, damp cottage on the outermost border of the wastes, Your Grace. They are required to harvest their own crops and wash their own linens to survive. Evelyn has already broken 3 fingernails, and Beatrice spent the morning screaming at a goat. They are entirely harmless and completely forgotten by the high society they cherished so much." Ethan let out a low, gravelly chuckle, tightening his grip around Clara's waist. "A fitting punishment. Let them learn the true value of hard work and humility." Martha nodded respectfully and slipped back into the solar, leaving the king and queen alone under the golden afternoon sky. Ethan looked down at Clara, his silver eyes burning with a sudden, beautiful anticipation for the future. The High Council has requested a grand coronation ball for the winter solstice, my love. A celebration of our union and the permanent alliance of our packs. Are you ready to show the entire world the true strength of the Northern Kingdom? Clara smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck, looking into the eyes of the man who had gone from her terrifying captor to her absolute sanctuary. As long as I am standing by your side, Ethan, Clara whispered, her voice filled with an unbreakable, authentic certainty, I am ready for anything. The wind swept across the emerald cliffs of the wastes, carrying their laughter and the promise of a long, peaceful reign far into the horizon. The vipers were gone, the broken pieces had been mended, and together the Alpha King and his resilient queen walked forward into a beautiful, infinite tomorrow. My beautiful, incredible friends, we have officially reached the end of this deeply emotional high-stakes journey. Seeing Ethan and Clara rise from the ashes of betrayal to claim their true destiny has been an absolute honor to share with you all. If this story touched your heart, brought a tear to your eye, or kept you on the edge of your seat, please take a brief moment right now to leave a comment below sharing your absolute favorite moment of their journey. Did you love the raw tension of their first meeting, or the explosive moment Ethan stood up without his crutches? I want to read all your beautiful thoughts. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications and give this video a massive thumbs up. Your incredible support helps our channel grow and allows us to keep bringing these addictive, high-quality audio stories to life. Thank you so much for watching wherever you are in the world, and remember, no matter how dark the night gets, your own turning point is just around the corner. Stay blessed, stay safe, and I will see you all in the next epic story.